My name is Avery Caldwell. I'm 28 years old, and 13 years ago, my parents stood in our kitchen in Greenwich and decided I was a bad investment. My mother said it calmly, like she was reviewing numbers. We don't invest in liabilities. My father slid a form across the counter, relinquishing my college fund, and told me to sign if I had any dignity left. When I refused, he handed me $200 and opened the front door. It was raining. He didn't look at me when he said, "Don't come back unless you're worth something." Tonight I'm sitting in a glass conference room at a probate attorney's office waiting for my wealthy uncle's will to be read. My parents arrived dressed for victory. My brother is already talking about portfolio expansion. Then the attorney clears his throat and reads the amendment. All asset distributions require written authorization from the sole controlling trustee, Avery Caldwell. The room goes quiet. I look at my mother and say evenly, "You were right. I wasn't an investment. I became the portfolio." Before I tell you the clause that made them realize they had no control, not even over their own inheritance, take a second to like and subscribe if you've ever been treated like a burden. And tell me, if the people who threw you away had to wait for your signature to survive, would you sign, "I grew up on North Street in Greenwich, Connecticut, in a colonial house with white shutters and a lawn my father treated like a status symbol"? The neighborhood was quiet, polished, the kind where every mailbox matched, and every family had at least one German car in the driveway. From the outside we looked stable, strategic. My father liked that word. Daniel Caldwell managed 3 regional auto dealerships across Fairfield County. He talked about numbers the way some men talk about sports gross margins, quarterly growth leverage ratios. My mother, Marissa, had a real estate license she used just enough to stay relevant at cocktail parties. Most of her energy went into presentation, hers, our houses, and eventually, my brother's. Tyler was 2.5 years younger than me, but in our house he was always ahead. Ahead academically, ahead socially, ahead in projected return. I didn't understand that language at first. I just knew that when I answered questions at the dinner table there was often a pause. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because I needed a second longer to arrange it. Words sometimes felt like puzzle pieces that refused to snap into place on command. I would see the idea clearly in my head, almost like a chart, but translating it into speech took effort. My mother would smile too tightly and jump in. "She's thoughtful," she'd say to guests. Then turning to me later in the kitchen while rinsing plates, she'd add, "You need to be faster, Avery. People don't wait for slow processing." One night when I was 14, my father invited a potential business partner over for dinner. The house smelled like rosemary and roasted chicken. My mother lit the tall white candles she saved for important people. I remember the sound of ice clinking in crystal glasses as the men discussed expansion plans. The partner asked me where I wanted to go to college. I said I liked economics. I liked the structure of it. Systems made sense to me. Before I could finish explaining why, my father laughed lightly. "She's still figuring that out," he said. "Tyler's the numbers guy." Tyler grinned. I went quiet. Later that week, I overheard my parents in the study. The door wasn't fully closed. My father was reviewing investment statements. "We need to reallocate," he said. "Tyler's prep program is going to cost more than we expected." "What about Avery's college fund?" my mother asked. A pause. "Papers shifting." "She's not Ivy material," he said flatly. "That money will work harder with Tyler." Work harder. I didn't confront them that night. I sat on my bedroom floor, back against the bed frame, staring at the pale blue walls I'd had since elementary school. The house was quiet except for the hum of the HVAC system. I told myself I had misunderstood. I hadn't. 2 months later, my father called me into the kitchen. The granite countertop was spotless as always. He slid a printed document toward me. "It's just internal family restructuring," he said. "We're consolidating the education accounts." I read slowly. The form stated that I voluntarily relinquished any claim to the custodial account previously established in my name. The balance listed at the bottom was $72,000. My hands felt cold. That was for my tuition, I said. My mother leaned against the counter, arms crossed. And your brother's future is a better allocation. I didn't agree to that. My father's expression hardened. We are your parents. We decide where resources go. I didn't sign that day. I pushed the paper back across the counter. That was when the tone shifted. You're being emotional, my mother said. This is exactly why we can't justify continued investment. Investment, allocation, resources. They never used the word daughter. From then on, everything became transactional. Tyler received a private math tutor 3 nights a week. I asked once if I could see a specialist to understand why reading under pressure felt like static in my head. My mother waved it off. You just need discipline. At dinner, conversations revolved around Tyler's projected MBA path, potential internships in New York, networking strategies. When I mentioned wanting to apply for a summer program in financial literacy at the local community college, my father barely looked up from his phone. Focus on graduating high school without drama, he said. I started working part-time at the Greenwich Library shelving books after school. The smell of paper and polished wood felt steadier than home. Numbers in non-fiction finance books made sense in a way conversations didn't. I began copying down definitions in a small notebook: fiduciary duty, asset protection, compound growth. I didn't know yet how important those words would become. The real fracture happened at another dinner this time, just us. No guests. The air smelled faintly of tomato sauce. Tyler was talking about a summer leadership camp that cost nearly $10,000. Where's that money coming from? I asked before I could stop myself. My father set his fork down slowly. From smart decisions. From my fund, I asked. Tyler rolled his eyes. Oh my God, Avery. My mother's voice went cold. If you can't compete, at least don't drain us. Drain us. That was the moment I understood something fundamental. In our house, love wasn't unconditional. It was performance-based. You were valuable if you increased the family's projected return. And in their model, I was underperforming. Around that time, my Uncle Gregory started appearing more often. He was my father's older brother-in-law by marriage, wealthy in a way my parents admired but never matched. He rarely spoke at family gatherings, but he observed everything. One afternoon, after hearing my father joke to a neighbor that I was our negative equity, Gregory asked me to walk with him outside. The late autumn air was sharp. Leaves scraped along the driveway. You process differently, he said quietly. Not slower. Differently. No one had ever said that to me before. I didn't know then that he was already taking mental notes. I didn't know that he had heard more than he let on the investment language, the reallocation, the way my parents measured worth in projected yield. I just knew that for the first time someone wasn't evaluating me like a declining asset. He was evaluating me like potential. The night everything broke open wasn't loud at first. It was November in Connecticut, the kind of damp cold that settles into your bones before winter officially begins. I had just come home from the library, my backpack heavier with borrowed finance books than homework. The house was unusually quiet. No television, no music from Tyler's room. My father was waiting in the kitchen. The relinquishment form was back on the counter. I spoke to our advisor, he said without looking at me. This ends tonight. My mother stood by the sink drying an already clean plate. Tyler sat at the island scrolling through his phone, pretending not to listen. I'm not signing it, I said. My voice shook, but I didn't step back. My father's jaw tightened. That account is being transferred tomorrow. With or without your cooperation. It's in my name. It was, he corrected. My mother turned around slowly. You need to understand something, Avery. Families invest where there's return. I'm your daughter, I said. And we've done the math, she replied. The words hung in the air like something toxic. I don't know what made me push further. Maybe it was the exhaustion of being measured for years. Maybe it was the way Tyler smirked without lifting his eyes from his screen. "You can't just erase me," I said. My father finally looked at me directly. His expression wasn't angry, it was dismissive. "You're not my legacy," he said. "Tyler is." That sentence landed harder than anything else. Not my legacy. I felt something inside me go still. "Sign it," he said again, sliding the paper forward. "No." The sound of the word seemed to echo more than it should have. My mother walked to a drawer, pulled out her wallet, and counted $200 in 20s. She placed the stack beside the form. "That should cover a bus ticket," she said evenly. "You want independence? Take it." For a second, I thought she was trying to scare me into compliance. Then my father walked to the front door and opened it. Cold air rushed into the kitchen. I could hear the wind against the trees, the faint hum of traffic in the distance. "You don't want to be part of this structure," he said. "Then you don't get the benefits of it." "You're serious?" My voice sounded small to my own ears. "You made your position clear." My mother replied. "We're making ours." Tyler still hadn't looked up. I stood there staring at the doorway, waiting for someone to break. For someone to laugh and say this had gone too far. No one did. My father picked up my backpack from the floor and handed it to me like a package being returned. "Don't come back unless you're worth something." That was the final calculation. I stepped outside because I didn't know what else to do. The rain had started thin, cold, persistent. It soaked through my hoodie within seconds. Behind me, the door shut. I heard the lock turn. The sound was precise, mechanical, final. I stood on the porch for longer than I cared to admit, staring at the wood grain of the door like it might open again if I just waited. It didn't. My hands were shaking when I pulled out my phone. There was only one person I could call. Uncle Gregory answered on the second ring. "I need a ride," I said. He didn't ask why. He only asked where. 20 minutes later, headlights cut through the rain at the end of the driveway. His black sedan pulled up quietly. He stepped out, took one look at my face, then at the closed door behind me. He didn't knock. He didn't confront them. He just opened the passenger door and said, "Get in." As we drove away, I looked back once. The house looked the same as it always had, white shutters, warm lights glowing through the windows. Nothing about it suggested that a 15-year-old girl had just been removed from the equation. Gregory kept his eyes on the road. After a few minutes, he spoke. "If they don't see your value," he said, calm and steady, "I will." I didn't cry in the car. I didn't understand yet that that sentence was the beginning of everything. I only knew one thing. I wasn't going back. Gregory didn't take me to a spare bedroom in some quiet guest house. He took me to his penthouse overlooking Long Island Sound. I remember stepping inside and smelling something clean and sharp, citrus and leather. The space was all glass and dark wood, the city lights reflecting off the water beyond the balcony. It didn't feel like comfort. It felt like precision. He handed me a towel and said, "You can stay. But this isn't charity." "I don't want charity," I said. "Good." The next morning, he knocked on my door at 5 a.m. Not aggressively. Just once. When I walked into the kitchen, he was already dressed, reviewing printed financial statements at the counter. He slid a stack toward me. Read. They were quarterly hedge fund reports, performance breakdowns, risk exposure charts. I didn't understand everything, but I understood patterns. My brain liked patterns. Numbers lined up in ways conversations never had. "Tell me what you see," he said. I hesitated. Then I pointed to a column. "Volatility's increasing here, but you're still overweight in that sector." He watched me carefully. "You noticed that in under 5 minutes." I shrugged. "It stands out." That became our routine. 5 a.m. statements. Evenings reviewing case studies. He didn't soften his tone because I was 15. If I misunderstood something, he corrected me. If I missed a connection, He made me find it. 3 months after I moved in, he scheduled an appointment at a neuropsychological clinic affiliated with Yale New Haven. I want data, he said, not opinions. The evaluation lasted hours. Pattern recognition tests, working memory exercises, timed reading assessments. When the report came back, Gregory read it silently at his desk. Then he handed it to me. High analytical reasoning, exceptional pattern integration, processing speed variability under verbal pressure. You're not slow, he said. You're wired for structure. That sentence did more than comfort me. It recalibrated me. For the first time, I understood that the delay in my speech wasn't incompetence, it was translation. My brain ran models. It just didn't rush commentary. Gregory began teaching me about trusts. Not the vague concept, the mechanics. Revocable versus irrevocable. Grantor versus trustee. Fiduciary duty under Connecticut law. Asset protection strategies. Tax exposure. Dynasty structuring. He explained that power wasn't ownership, it was control. People confuse beneficiary with authority, he said one morning. They're rarely the same. By 17, I could read a balance sheet faster than most of the junior analysts at his firm. He let me sit in on internal meetings, not to speak, but to observe. At 18, I enrolled at UConn, majoring in finance with a concentration in financial planning. I earned a partial scholarship. Gregory paid the rest but never framed it as rescue. It's an investment, he said once, almost amused. The difference was he expected return in discipline, not gratitude. During college, I interned summers at Whitmore Capital in Stamford. I started with administrative tasks, data entry portfolio summaries, but within 2 years I was reviewing compliance documentation and trust amendments. That's when I first saw the structure of the Whitmore Irrevocable Dynasty Trust. Gregory had established it 8 years before his death. At the time, I was 20. The trust held diversified assets, commercial real estate in Fairfield County, municipal bond ladders, private equity stakes, and controlling shares in Whitmore Capital Management. It was designed for longevity, multi-generational, protected from creditors, structured to minimize estate tax under both federal and Connecticut thresholds. Initially, Gregory named himself primary trustee. A corporate fiduciary was listed as successor. Then, 5 years ago, there was an amendment. He added me as co-trustee. I remember holding the draft in his office. My hands were steady, but my throat wasn't. Why, I asked. Because you understand stewardship, he said. And because I trust your restraint. Co-trustee wasn't ceremonial. It meant legal authority. It meant fiduciary obligation. It meant that if he became incapacitated, I would act. For 3 years, we operated that way. He would walk me through decisions: why one distribution request was approved, why another was denied, how to document reasoning, how to protect the trust from emotional pressure. Documentation is armor, he would say. Intent means nothing without record. 3 years before he died, there was another amendment. This one was more significant. He removed the corporate fiduciary as successor. He named me sole controlling trustee upon his death or incapacity. I stared at that line for a long time. That's too much, I said quietly. No, he replied. It's appropriate. He explained the reasoning in clinical terms. The trust required someone who understood both the assets and the people attached to them. Someone who could withstand pressure. Someone who would not collapse under accusation. You've already survived exile, he said. You can survive entitlement. He also added distribution clauses, conditional discretionary. Beneficiaries would not receive automatic payouts. Annual distributions would require trustee approval based on behavior, financial need, and absence of material hostility. It wasn't vindictive. It was structured. 2 years before his death, he made the final adjustment. Language tightening. Clarifications referencing Connecticut Uniform Trust Code provisions. Reinforcement against contestation. Power isn't loud, he reminded me one evening as we reviewed the final draft. It's documented. When Gregory died, it wasn't dramatic. A cardiac event. Sudden. Clinical. Grief came later. First came paperwork. I stepped into the role not as a niece inheriting money, but as a fiduciary assuming responsibility. I didn't call my parents. They found out through the obituary in the Greenwich Sentinel. And they assumed naturally that wealth flowed in straight lines. They had no idea it flowed through me. As Harold adjusted his glasses and prepared to read the distribution clause, my mother leaned forward, already calculating numbers in her head. I felt the old November rain in my memory, cold, sharp, final. If the people who once locked you out had to wait for your approval to move forward, would you hesitate? Subscribe if you believe knowledge is the strongest form of protection. The conference room at Benton and Hale overlooked Greenwich Avenue. Floor-to-ceiling windows, neutral carpet, a long walnut table polished to a mirror finish. It smelled faintly of coffee and printer toner. Everything about the space was controlled. My parents arrived 10 minutes early. My mother wore navy, structured blazer, pearl earrings, the same posture she used at open houses when she wanted buyers to feel intimidated. My father carried a leather portfolio like he was walking into a merger negotiation. Tyler scrolled through his phone, relaxed, almost amused. They nodded at me the way you acknowledge a distant acquaintance. No apology, no recognition. Harold Benton entered precisely at 2 p.m., carrying a thick binder and a sealed envelope. He was methodical, the kind of attorney who never dramatized anything. Probate in Connecticut isn't theatrical. It's administrative, clinical. We sat. Harold began with formalities: date of death, verification of the will, acknowledgement of the Whitmore Irrevocable Dynasty Trust. My father tapped a pen against the table, impatience disguised as confidence. When Harold mentioned the estimated estate valuation, just under $38 million in diversified holdings, my mother's shoulders lifted almost imperceptibly. Then he turned to the trust amendment. Under the terms revised 3 years prior to Mr. Whitmore's passing, Harold said, adjusting his glasses, all asset distributions require written authorization from the sole controlling trustee. My father leaned back. And that would be the corporate fiduciary. Harold did not look up. No, the pause lasted exactly 1 second longer than comfortable. That authority rests solely with Ms. Avery Caldwell. The air in the room shifted. Tyler's head snapped up. My mother blinked once slowly, as if she had misheard. That's not possible, my father said flatly. Harold slid a copy of the amendment across the table. My signature was printed beneath Gregory's, dated, notarized, filed. Silence. My mother recovered first. Well, she said smoothly, folding her hands. Obviously, this is symbolic. Gregory always liked dramatic gestures. It is not symbolic, Harold replied. The authority is binding under Connecticut Uniform Trust Code. The trust is irrevocable. The controlling trustee exercises full discretion over distributions. My father's jaw tightened. So what exactly are we receiving? Harold turned a page. Daniel and Marissa Caldwell are listed as discretionary beneficiaries, eligible for annual distributions contingent upon trustee approval. Contingent, my mother repeated. Yes, Harold said. Specifically, distributions may be withheld in cases of material hostility toward the trustee or actions deemed detrimental to the trust's integrity. Tyler let out a short laugh. Material hostility. That's vague. It is defined in Section 4.3, Harold answered calmly. Public disparagement, legal contestation, attempts to undermine trustee authority. My father leaned forward, palms flat on the table. This is absurd. Gregory would never. He did. Harold interrupted, not raising his voice. My mother shifted strategies instantly. Avery, she said, turning toward me for the first time, her tone softening. Sweetheart, this doesn't need to be complicated. We're family. The word landed differently now. Gregory left us the Westport property, didn't he? She continued. We'll need to liquidate that quickly. The market's favorable. Harold didn't look at her. The Westport property remains trust-owned. Any sale requires trustee authorization. My father stared at me. So you decide, he said. Yes, Harold answered before I could. Ms. Caldwell decides. The weight of the room settled onto me, but it didn't crush me. It felt structured, documented. Exactly as Gregory had trained me. My mother's expression hardened. This is inappropriate, she said. She's 28. 28, Harold confirmed. With 3 years of co-trustee experience and sole authority established by amendment. Tyler pushed back in his chair. Okay, fine. Then what about my educational allocation? Harold flipped pages. You are assigned an educational subtrust. Tuition and related expenses may be covered at the trustee's discretion upon submission of institutional documentation. So I submit receipts, Tyler said. You submit requests, Harold corrected. Approval is not automatic. The silence that followed was heavier than before. My father's composure cracked first. This is retaliation, he said sharply. You're punishing us. I met his eyes. No, I said evenly. I'm administering a trust. My mother's voice thinned. You wouldn't deny us access to what Gregory intended. Gregory intended structure, I replied. Harold opened the sealed envelope. There is an additional provision, he said. My father exhaled in frustration. What now? In the event that any beneficiary initiates legal action contesting the trustee's authority without substantiated evidence of breach their distribution, eligibility converts to 0. The word 0 seemed to echo. My father froze. You're threatening us, he said quietly. I'm informing you, Harold replied. For the first time, the confidence drained from my mother's face. She looked at me differently, not as an inconvenience, not as a liability, as an obstacle. Avery, she said, voice low. After everything you'd hold this over us, I remembered standing on the porch at 15. Rain soaking through my hoodie, the lock turning behind me. You told me not to come back unless I was worth something, I said calmly. I'm here. No one spoke. Outside the window, late afternoon light reflected off passing cars. Inside, the balance of power had shifted so completely it almost felt surgical. My father gathered his papers abruptly. We'll review this with counsel. You're entitled to independent review, Harold said. However, I advise against contestation, because you'll lose the silence implied. Tyler looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time, not as background noise, not as delayed processing, but as gatekeeper. And in that moment, I realized something Gregory had known all along. Ownership impresses people. Authority changes them. When my father said they would review this with counsel, he expected hesitation. He expected fear. He expected the version of me who once stood in the rain with a backpack and nowhere to go. Instead, Harold calmly lifted the final document from the binder. There is a letter of intent from Mr. Whitmore, he said. While not legally binding, it provides context for the structure of the trust. My mother straightened in her chair. Finally, she murmured, as if this would restore the narrative she preferred. Harold unfolded the pages carefully. The paper made a soft, deliberate sound in the quiet room. He began to read. To my family, wealth is not a reward. It is responsibility. I have observed over many years how each of you approaches both. My father's expression shifted just slightly. I have heard the language used to describe Avery: waste, negative equity, liability. I do not use those words lightly. They were not spoken in my presence for effect. They were spoken in private without restraint. The room felt smaller. My mother's eyes flicked toward my father. Stewardship requires restraint, foresight, and emotional discipline. I have witnessed those traits consistently in Avery. I have not witnessed them consistently in others. Tyler let out a quiet breath through his nose but didn't interrupt. Harold continued. This trust is structured not to punish but to protect. Protect the assets. protect the legacy, and protect the individual best suited to preserve both. My father leaned back slowly as if physical distance might soften the words. Should any beneficiary attempt to discredit the trustee publicly or privately in an effort to pressure distribution, I direct the trustee to consider such conduct evidence of material hostility. Material hostility. Not emotion, not anger, documentable behavior. Harold lowered the page slightly before finishing. I did not choose sentiment. I chose stewardship. The silence afterward was not explosive. It was hollow. My mother's composure cracked first, not dramatically, but in small fractures. Her shoulders dropped. The certainty drained from her posture. He misunderstood, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. We were trying to motivate her. You called her a liability? Harold replied quietly, not accusatory, just factual. My father's eyes were fixed on the table now. Not on me. You're enjoying this, he said without looking up. I considered that carefully. No, I answered. I'm fulfilling my duty. That word again. Duty. Not revenge, not satisfaction, structure. Tyler finally spoke, his tone no longer casual. So that's it. She controls everything. Yes, Harold confirmed. Unless a court finds breach of fiduciary duty, which based on documentation would be unlikely. Unlikely. Not impossible. Just improbable enough to be foolish to pursue. My mother's gaze shifted toward me fully now. Not sharp, not superior. Measured. You'd cut us off? She asked. The question wasn't loud, it wasn't even confrontational. It was calculating. I would enforce the trust, I said. If distributions are requested respectfully, evaluated appropriately, and aligned with the trust's purpose, they'll be considered. And if they're not, my father asked, then they won't. The simplicity of it seemed to unsettle them more than anger would have. Gregory's final paragraph was still resting in Harold's hands. He cleared his throat once more. Avery was told not to return unless she was worth something. I consider her invaluable. The word invaluable lingered in the air. Not profitable, not high yield. Invaluable. My mother blinked rapidly, but she didn't cry. She had never cried in rooms like this. She had always believed composure was power, but power had shifted. Not through volume, not through accusation, through documentation signed years before this afternoon. My father gathered his portfolio slowly this time. No sudden movements, no threats. This isn't over, he said quietly. No, I agreed. It's not, because the trust was designed for longevity, for years, for decades. They hadn't lost money in a moment. They had lost control for a generation. Harold began organizing the documents, the legal process moving forward with calm inevitability. Outside traffic continued along Greenwich Avenue. People walked past the building unaware that inside a family hierarchy had inverted. Tyler stood last. He looked at me not with arrogance now, not with dismissal, with assessment. You plan this? He asked. No, I said. Gregory did. And that was the truth. I hadn't orchestrated the structure. I had simply grown into the authority he documented. As we filed out of the conference room, my mother paused beside me. For a second, I thought she might apologize. She didn't. Instead, she said quietly, "You've changed." I met her gaze without hesitation. "No," I replied. "You just never calculated me correctly." The consequences didn't arrive in a single dramatic collapse. They unfolded the way most financial miscalculations do, quietly, then all at once. Within 2 weeks of the will reading, my father contacted 2 separate estate litigation firms in Fairfield County. Both reviewed the trust documents. Both declined to pursue contestation without evidence of breach. There wasn't any. Gregory's amendments were airtight, properly executed, witnessed, notarized, filed. Every discretionary clause aligned with Connecticut Uniform Trust Code. The language regarding material hostility was specific enough to be enforceable, broad enough to deter recklessness. My father stopped using the word absurd. He started using the word strategic. That was when I knew he understood. The first real fracture appeared in his business. For years, he had been preparing to expand one of his dealership locations, refinancing against projected future liquidity. Liquidity he assumed would come from Gregory's estate. He had even mentioned it casually at dinner before Gregory passed. Once the Whitmore capital unlocks, he had said, we'll scale. It never unlocked. Because distribution wasn't automatic. It required written request, documentation, review, evaluation of intent. And the first request he submitted was defensive, in tone urgent, accusatory, referencing family expectation. I declined it. Not out of anger, because the request failed to demonstrate alignment with the trust's purpose or appropriate need. I documented everything. 3 weeks later, the expansion deal stalled. Without the expected infusion, the financing terms worsened. A competing dealership secured the location instead. Greenwich isn't a large town in the circles that matter. Word moves. Not gossip. Not scandal. Just patterns. Whitmore trusted the niece, someone said at a private investment dinner, according to a former colleague of Gregory's, who later mentioned it to me. Not the son-in-law. That sentence carried more weight than any public accusation. Reputation in Fairfield County is currency. Gregory had invested his in me. My father felt that shift. The second property in Westport, purchased years earlier as a strategic hold, went on the market by early spring. It wasn't framed as desperation, it was framed as reallocation. But I knew the timing. Tyler's situation was less dramatic but more personal. His MBA tuition invoices began arriving with formal request forms attached. Each semester he submitted documentation. Each time I reviewed it carefully. The trust permitted educational distributions. It did not require full coverage. I approved tuition. I declined living stipends beyond modest housing benchmarks. He had to take federal student loans for the remainder. The first time he realized that, he called me directly. "You're really going to make me borrow?" he asked. "I'm ensuring you have skin in the outcome," I replied. He didn't argue long. I think part of him understood. For the first time in his life, capital wasn't unconditional. My mother tried a different approach. She requested a meeting. Not at the law office, at a cafe on Greenwich Avenue. I agreed. She arrived early, ordered tea, sat upright as always. "This doesn't have to be adversarial," she said carefully. "We can repair things." Repair. The word felt misplaced. "I'm not at war," I said. "Then why does it feel like we're being punished?" "Because you're not controlling it," I answered calmly. That was the closest we came to honesty. She didn't apologize for the porch, or the form, or the word liability. Instead, she said, "You've become very precise." Gregory's training had taught me something critical. Emotional volatility weakens fiduciary position. So I stayed steady. "I'm fulfilling my responsibility," I repeated. Annual discretionary distributions were eventually approved, modest, documented, proportionate. Enough to satisfy baseline expectations. Not enough to restore dominance. And that was the real shift. They hadn't lost everything. They had lost assumption. They had lost entitlement. They had lost the ability to move capital without passing through me. The most telling moment came 6 months later at a community fundraiser. I attended at the request of a Whitmore Capital board member. My father was there too. For years, he had introduced himself as connected to Gregory's portfolio. That night, when someone asked about the Whitmore estate, he paused just slightly before answering. "You'd have to speak with Avery," he said. Not bitterness, recognition. He had recalculated. The house on North Street still stood, the shutters still white, the lawn still trimmed. But the internal ledger had shifted permanently. They had once evaluated me as a liability. Now, every financial projection they made ran through my signature, and I did not raise my voice. I did not gloat. I did not retaliate. I administered. For a long time, I thought the night I stood in the rain at 15 was the worst thing that would ever happen to me. Now I understand it was a recalibration. There's a difference between being unwanted and being underestimated. At 15, I believed I was unwanted, that something fundamental in me had failed to meet a standard I couldn't see. I replayed my mother's words over and over in my head, liability drain not worth investing in, like they were objective truths instead of projections. But 13 years later, sitting at the head of a conference table with a fiduciary binder open in front of me, I realized something simple. They didn't misunderstand my value. They misunderstood the kind of value I was built for. My parents believed value was speed, charisma, immediate return. Tyler excelled in rooms. I excelled in systems. They measured performance in applause. Gregory measured it in structure. It took me years to separate my identity from their assessment. Even after I moved into Gregory's penthouse, even after the neuropsychological report confirmed what he already suspected, part of me still reacted when someone interrupted me mid-sentence. Part of me still rushed to speak faster than I needed to. Control, I learned, isn't dominance. It's stability under pressure. When I became sole controlling trustee, the title didn't feel powerful. It felt heavy. Not because of the money, because of the responsibility. $38 million isn't abstract when you understand tax exposure, market volatility, generational planning. It's not a trophy. It's a structure that can collapse if handled emotionally. There were moments, quiet ones, when I asked myself whether I should be more generous, whether withholding full discretionary distributions made me cold. Then I would remember the kitchen counter, the form, the calculation in my father's eyes. They weren't cruel because they hated me. They were strategic because they thought they were right. That's what makes it complicated. Forgiveness for me didn't look like reconciliation. It looked like neutrality. I stopped waiting for an apology that would likely never come. I stopped rehearsing speeches in my head where they finally admitted they were wrong. Instead, I defined boundaries. They submit requests. I review them. I respond in writing. Professional, documented, calm. Some people think power is loud, that it announces itself with humiliation or spectacle. Real power is procedural. It signs, it declines, it approves, it moves capital without raising its voice. The first time my father introduced me at a fundraiser as the trustee of the Whitmore estate, I noticed something subtle. He didn't say, "my daughter." He didn't say, "Gregory's niece." He used my role. For most of my childhood, my identity in that family was comparative, less than Tyler, slower than expected, not strategic enough. Now it was structural, and that mattered more than any apology. I don't hate my parents. Hate would require more emotion than I'm willing to invest. I see them clearly now. Two people who equated worth with projected yield, who believed parenting was capital allocation, who assumed authority would always remain upstream from them. They miscalculated one thing. Time compounds, skills compound, discipline compounds, and being dismissed early can become insulation later. If there's a lesson in any of this, it isn't revenge. It isn't about making someone kneel or watching them lose everything. It's about this. You are not obligated to accept someone else's valuation of you. You are not required to shrink because someone else can't measure your strengths correctly. And sometimes the most radical act isn't leaving. It's returning, not to beg, not to argue, but to sign. 13 years ago, I stood on a wet porch with $200 in my hand and nowhere to go. Tonight, I sit at a desk overlooking Long Island Sound, reviewing quarterly trust reports with my signature at the bottom. They told me not to come back unless I was worth something. I didn't come back louder. I came back documented. If you've ever been misjudged by the people who were supposed to know you best, subscribe. Not for revenge stories, but for proof that discipline compounds. And tell me in the comments were you ever labeled the liability in your family, because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is become the authority they never saw coming.